Time and time again, we hear the American left say that conservatives are science deniers. We see the left talking about science deniers in the Trump administration and saying that they are a threat to the world. We see the left quoting people like Bill Nye as a source for the stories about those evil right-wing science deniers and how they must be stopped. We see marches in America hilariously called March for Science, and marchers in these annual demonstrations holding up signs that read, "Trust scientific facts. I like big brains. Science is real. We need to face facts," and how they are just so psyched for science. But the truth of the matter is that the American and global left are the ultimate science deniers, and their position on many of the topics I'm going to show you are an actual immediate threat to your safety, your communities, your children's future, and the subject of science itself. Never mind the fact that the whole 97% claim that they constantly parrot originates from a self-employed cartoonist who is not a scientist at all, and whose poll is even rebutted by the very climate scientist he quotes. Never mind the topic of climate change altogether. I covered that in depth in a video on this channel just last week. I want to talk about some much more important scientific studies and polls. Scientific facts by big-brained individuals that even in the very near future, in my lifetime, will lead to the destruction of entire societies, and how the left denies all of them because they do not align with their political goals and narratives. Let's start with fatherless homes. We constantly see leftist opinion pieces denying the unanimous scientific studies behind the dangers of fatherless homes and the threat it poses to our youth. Articles with captions like, "Children are better off fatherless," and how children are only at risk when they don't have a mother, and the fact that most times they don't talk about this at all, show exactly what their position is on this issue. Now, before I tell you why the left refuses to talk about the effects of fatherless homes, let me first tell you what unanimous scientists, researchers, and psychologists have found. Please save the small-brained replies of, "I grew up in a fatherless home and I turned out fine." Your case is likely anecdotal, and the anecdotal means nothing to statistical averages. Firstly, according to studies by renowned BJS statisticians, 61% of all federal prisoners grew up in single-mother households. If you think that the science-loving leftists would certainly notice and acknowledge this study that is backed up and consistent with hundreds of other studies that came before and after this one, you'd be wrong. According to another scientific study entitled Drugs, Guns, and Disadvantaged Children, as high as 70% of all children who are in juvenile detention also grew up in fatherless single-mother homes. According to another U.S. Department of Health and Human Services study, which is on par with a National Center for Health Statistics study, a child is 10 times more likely to use drugs, and that 71% of all adolescent substance abusers grew up in fatherless homes. There are other studies, like some quoted in the book called The Boy Crisis, that say that this can be as high as 82%. How about teen pregnancy, which in many cases leads to abortion? Well, according to hundreds of studies quoted in hundreds of science journals, fatherless teenage girls are at least 5 times more likely to get pregnant than teenage girls raised by both a mother and a father. According to Edward Crook, PhD, in the journal called The Vital Importance of Paternal Presence in Children's Lives, 71% of high school dropouts are fatherless. And have you ever wondered why the left has no problem with talking about suicide prevention, but will never mention the scientific fact that over 60% of all suicides are by people who grew up in single-mother households? All of this, and we still keep seeing how awesome single mothers are doing and how they keep raising kick-ass kids, and how it is actually better to be raised by a single mother. The truth is, though, that boys need a male adult in their lives from prepubescent stages through postpubescent stages, and girls need a strong, present, and loving male role model in their lives throughout those same stages. The lovely leftist mantra of "science" is pretty firm on all of this. And if you think this is bad, just know that it will get a lot worse. White, non-Hispanic fatherless homes went from only around 5% in the 1950s to almost 30% today. Black fatherless homes went from 22% in the 1960s to 72% today. Hispanics are over 55% fatherless, and Asians are only at about 17% fatherless. Have you ever wondered why there were 0 mass shootings in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, even though we had virtually the exact same handguns at that time, and there were way less gun laws? Over 85% of the past 108 mass shootings since 1982 were carried out with handguns, so you would think that they should have been happening in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, right? And I wonder if fatherless homes also correlates to children being prescribed with psychotropic drugs at a rate that is 15 times higher than the 1960s because of the fact that 80% of adolescents in psychiatric hospitals grew up in fatherless homes. I also wonder if fatherless homes by demographic group correlates to the crime per 100,000 by demographic group data that we see in FBI Table 21A. Nah, probably just a coincidence. The reason why the left keeps denying this unquestionable, unanimous, and undebatable science is twofold. First, in all their men are bad, patriarchy is evil, feminist glory, the left cannot and never will bear to admit that fathers are important. Secondly, and most importantly, it hurts their political narrative. All available studies show that almost 80% of all single mothers vote for the Democratic Party. The left would never do anything to upset a voting bloc which consists of millions upon millions of people. The second example of leftist science denial is that there are biological differences between male and female. The left argues that differences between men and women are largely a social construct and that people are born with a blank slate and influenced only by their surroundings and society. Even though science itself overwhelmingly debunks this completely, the left overwhelmingly denies this science.
That what we understand about race and gender in terms of biological differences are completely false, right? That they're a social construct. So there are no biological differences, but we have given social meaning to biological conditions over time.
Helen Pluckrose, who is best known for her role in combating the science denial in most of our American universities via the recent Academic Grievance Studies report, recently attended a discussion at Portland University with James Damore to try to make a breakthrough to students about men and women being different from each other biologically. Well, here is what happened.
James argues, accurately, that there are differences between men and women. This is a strange position to be in, to be arguing for something that is so universally and widely accepted within biology. What is not as widely accepted is that culture is also evolutionary, but I'm going to argue that biology and culture are both evolutionary. Let's look at differences between men and women that are explicitly anatomical and physiological. Are men taller than women on average? Does anyone take offense at that fact? Are you irritated?
There's always a standout.
So I would say you could be irritated by it. You could be irritated by the fact that women have to be the ones to gestate and lactate. You could be irritated by a lot of truths. But taking offense is a response that is rejection of reality. So there's some binaries.
Oh, wow. Security! This is what happens. Oh, did they shut off the volume? Can you hear?
The left constantly denies science because science itself goes 100% against the egalitarian equality of outcome society that the left tries so desperately to attain.
I'm interested in people being able to have different choices and having equality of outcome.
Aha, well, so the overwhelming proportion of people who are in prisons are male. Now, do you want to equalize that, just out of curiosity? What about bricklayers? They're 99% male.
The insane ideology and science denial is leaking into mainstream society and destroying the culture and the idea of America, and it is all by design. Of course, the left does not advocate for equality of outcome when it comes to certain things that they know that women would not be able to do because of biological differences. They would never advocate for more women to be bricklayers, construction workers, NFL football players, or storm the beaches of Normandy during World War II. They know that women would overwhelmingly fail in these certain areas. Examples of this are, of course, every time a male pretending to be a female identifying as transgender participates in a woman's sporting event, they overwhelmingly dominate every single time. They also don't advocate for the NBA to be more white, for teaching fields to have more men, or for suicides by gender to be more equalized either. This mainstream science denial has infested the academia complex in America. more particularly the most prestigious universities in the country. Take the grievance studies itself for an example. A group of intellectuals wrote several fake academic papers and submitted them to top women's studies and gender studies journals in the country with an overwhelming success rate. One of the papers claimed that watching dogs humping at dog parks contributes to rape culture on college campus. This paper was accepted in the top feminist journal in the country, which eventually will turn into mainstream gender studies curriculum in our top universities. Can you see how this can be an issue?
I just read my email. We have our first win. The dog park paper has been accepted. They don't know. We're about to tell them.
Gotta read you something. Dear Dr. Helen Wilson, I have now closely considered the revisions of your manuscript, Dog Park, and will recommend its publication in Gender, Place, and Culture. You have done very good work to address the issues your viewers raised and have clarified your arguments. Thank you for your contribution to Gender, Place, and Culture, and I hope to be seeing your manuscript in print. Yours truly, PhD, Managing Editor, Gender, Place, and Culture. We have an accepted paper in the #1 feminist geography journal.
The third case of clear science denial comes with the transgender community and gender dysphoria itself. The American Psychiatric Association refers to transgenders as having a mental condition referred to as gender dysphoria, which is defined as the condition of feeling one's emotional and psychological identity as male or female to be opposite to one's biological gender. The left constantly rails on about how we need to immediately confiscate weapons from people with mental disorders, but of course they do not support the Trump military ban on transgenders, who will eventually have weapons in the military. Hypocrisy and cognitive dissonance is what leftists do best. Furthermore, there was a recent study done by Brown University which concluded that gender dysphoria occurring around the time of puberty could be due to peer pressure or online influences. The leftist mob then proceeded to demand and threaten Brown University to delete this scientific study or face violence. They were successful in their science terrorism, as Brown University subsequently deleted the study, but faced criticism from some in the intellectual and scientific community for caving to the leftist outrage mob of science deniers. Brown University released the following statement. Quote, following the decision to remove a news story on research into rapid onset gender dysphoria, the university has issued a series of statements to the Brown community. In light of questions raised about research design and data collection related to Lisa Littman's study on rapid onset gender dysphoria, Brown determined that removing the article from news distribution is the most responsible course of action. So instead of preventing people from becoming what the left says is one of the most oppressed groups of people in this country, who also has a high rate of suicide, they instead demand a study that would be positive be deleted, and continue to further glorifying transgenderism through online and media influences, the exact thing that the study says not to do. Another case of liberal science denial is one of the most hypocritical cases there is. It is in fact the embodiment of the term cognitive dissonance, and it is almost laughable how selective the left is with which science they choose to believe in. This case is immigration into America and how it relates to carbon emissions and wages. It's always been interesting to me that the left loves to talk about carbon emissions, but then also supports mass immigration into the most industrialized nations in the world. America and the West would not have had any population increase since the 1970s because we have all been below replacement rate for decades. Hundreds of millions of extra cars were added, which emit millions of extra tons of carbon each and every year, bumper-to-bumper traffic jams that last for hours, all solely because of immigration alone. But yet the left, who says that climate change is the most important issue to them, also support policies that go exactly against that. Cognitive dissonance at its finest yet again. According to census projections, the population in America and most of the West may have even decreased since the 1970s, according to researchers, without immigration. But hey, let's support extinguishing a fire with gasoline. And let's talk about wages. Our immigration comes mostly from the most dangerous countries in the world. The vast majority of immigrants into America today are low-wage, low-skilled workers that have double the birth rates of your average white American. The seemingly never-ending flow has dramatically driven down wages in America and ballooned our population from around 200 million in 1990 to 325 million today in 2018. American companies no longer have to compete for the workers, which in turn would force them to offer incentive packages and pay higher wages. No, the workers now have to line up and compete for the company and for the job. Not only are we getting people mainly coming from the most dangerous countries on earth, but we're getting the least educated people as well. Almost 60% of all immigrants that come from Mexico have a less than high school education, and 32 of the 50 states' main source of immigration is coming from Mexico. This is up from just 4 states where the main source of immigration was coming from Mexico in the 1950s. They're not sending their best. All of this while the left cries about wages and demands that companies pay more, while also supporting the very thing that is the main driver of depressed median wages in this country. Really makes you think. Furthermore, we see the left consistently call for more social safety nets in America. Things like free healthcare, free college, and lasting social security are at the top of their list. While shouting at the top of their lungs their list of demands, they also turn their backs on the undeniable fact that America's population will reach the next earmark of 450 million very, very soon, like within our lifetime. This population growth will be caused 100% by immigration and the children that immigrants have, and a large portion of people living here, then, will be the very product of the millions upon millions of immigrants that the left demanded to be let in, sucking those very social safety nets dry. According to the Census SIPP, as well as Pew Research, over 55% of all native-born Hispanic-led households are on welfare. Over 70% of all foreign-born Hispanic-led households are on welfare, and over 63% of all illegal immigrants are on welfare. Yale recently published a study that determined that there could be as high as 36 million people here illegally. That's 1 out of every 9 people. But does the left care? Nope. Remember, they're stuck in either low IQ mode, uninformed mode, or cognitive dissonance mode on a constant basis. Maybe all 3. Based on all available data, projections, studies, and statistics, by 2050, America will be made up of over 200 million welfare recipients, and median wages will be much, much worse than they are now. A paper by economist George J. Borjas called The Analytics of the Wage Effect of Immigration even finds that if the immigration that occurred from 1960 through 2013 was cut by even just 60%, the median hourly wage in America would be up to 20% higher than it is today. This is also reiterated in a book written by Borjas called We Wanted Workers, which I suggest all of you read. The immigrants of the early 1900s would laugh at the idea of welfare and would cringe at the sight of immigrants marching into America waving the flags of their home country. Our ancestors would be rolling over in their graves at the sight of America today. Another hypocrisy in the immigration debate I've noticed is the fact that the left will talk for hours about how oppressed Black Americans are in this country, yet fail to acknowledge the fact that immigration, legal and illegal, hits Black Americans the hardest of all groups economically. According to a paper by economists Gordon Hanson, Jeffrey Grager, and George Borjas called Immigration and African American Employment Opportunities, they find that the employment rate of Black men, and particularly of low-skilled Black men, fell precipitously from 1960 to 2000. At the same time, the incarceration rate of Black men rose markedly. This paper examines the relation between immigration and these trends in Black employment and incarceration. Using data drawn up from the 1960 to 2000 U.S. censuses, they found strong correlation between immigration, Black wages, Black employment rates, and Black incarceration rates. It sounds like the third world immigration the left overwhelmingly chooses above Americans has a strong correlation with this occurrence. Science and math proves this. The left denies it. They want voters. They want to feel good while they fall asleep on their Tempur-Pedic pillows in their white neighborhoods while their cheap nannies put their kids to sleep in the other room. Now, another big case of science denial by the left is the crime rate per 100,000 by ethnic groups in America. Visit your local college campus and you will likely hear in the distance a rich white SJW screaming about social justice, prison reform, and Black Lives Matter through a megaphone. Turn on your TV and you will likely see your liberal news pundit who lives in a neighborhood that is 97% white telling you how dangerous white males are and how we must fight for equality of outcome because everyone is inherently born equal and exactly the same. The truth is, however, that this couldn't be further from the truth. Blank slateism has been debunked long ago by science, and people just aren't born equal in all aspects. Don Lemon, for example, will scream through the TV at you about Black Lives Matter, hiding from you the fact that double the amount of whites are shot by cops on a yearly basis, and the per 100,000 crime rate of black Americans and the rate of police run-ins versus arrests completely dissolves any overrepresentation of police shootings in the black community. The left will tell you over and over again that there absolutely cannot be any blame placed on the black community in any way, shape, or form, and that the white man needs to keep apologizing and doing everything he can to help. Instead of trying to reform the black community to fix the issues of a 72% out-of-wedlock rate, a 12.4 per 100,000 rate of murder, a 13.5 per 100,000 rate of rape, and a 254.3 per 100,000 rate of assault, they instead call for a reform on the prisons and an early release of these prisoners because they say that the system is just completely unjust and they're all just innocent. And of course, I saved the best case of leftist science denial for last. This, of course, is the case of the complete and utter denial of the science behind the heritability of cognitive ability and how the science shows us that IQ overwhelmingly comes from DNA and is on average different across ethnic lines. American psychologist and sociologist Richard Herrnstein and scientist Charles Murray published a popular book in 1995 called The Bell Curve, which outlined these differences perfectly. The science behind the bell curve showed that on average the IQ of East Asians is around 107, the average IQ for white people of mostly European descent is around 100, the average IQ for Hispanics is around 88, and the average IQ for black Americans is around 85. This science is also backed up by James D. Watson, the scientist who discovered DNA itself and the double helix structure, so you would think that he would know a little bit about DNA. Of course, Watson was ostracized by the left and forced to sell his Nobel Prize for mentioning this instead. The scientific facts outlined by people like Herrnstein, Murray, and Watson show the actual cause for why we see such vast differences in test scores in schools and differences in crime rate per 100,000, which fall into the exact same ranking by race: Asians, whites, Hispanics, and blacks. The science also shows, via studies of twins being separated at birth, growing up in different environments, that cultural upbringing, poverty, and surroundings has only a little to do with crime and IQ. The main driver of it is DNA, and according to crime statistics, poverty is not correlated in almost all of the types of crimes in America when separated by racial and ethnic groups. The serum testosterone differences, IQ, and delayed gratification come to mind instead when trying to find why these gaps in crime rate exist. A perfect example is when looking at which group of rich NFL players are overwhelmingly perpetrators of domestic abuse in the NFL. The heritability of IQ is also reinforced by just a quick visit to greatschools.org to check out elementary schools and high schools in rich areas versus poor areas of America. Within this publicly available data, you will see the same exact rankings in math, science, and English scores time and time again over and over. Asians at the top, whites second, Hispanics third, and black Americans last. Now, this is not to say that there aren't really dumb Asian people and really smart black people, because there are, but this is just anecdotal and irrelevant to the data of averages. Now, of course, if the left was truly concerned about helping the ones given the short end of the DNA stick, you would think that they would support policy moves that target the small portion of this problem that is attributed to poverty and cultural upbringing, right? Wrong. Instead of being overwhelmingly opposed to low-skilled, uneducated immigration by the millions into this country, the left overwhelmingly supports it. They even go as far as calling for the abolishment of ICE and no borders in this country at all. instead of being overwhelmingly opposed to children growing up in fatherless homes, which leads to a child being vastly more likely to drop out of high school, grow up in poverty, lead to a life of crime, use drugs, become pregnant, and commit suicide. The left says that children are better off being raised by single mothers, or they don't talk about the issue at all. Instead of acknowledging that there are differences and calling for cultural changes in these communities, holding communities accountable, and helping to change from within, the left instead calls for the equality of outcome and eliminating the standardized test in elite high schools in New York because there are just too many Asians being accepted. This is the reason why Asians are suing Harvard, New York City, and many other universities to end affirmative action, which overwhelmingly affects Asian success in schools. So all in all, as you can see, the left, while upon their ever-so-righteous pseudo-moral high horse screaming for all the things that sound great to the untrained eye and uninformed ear, they also support policies and issues that go 100% against the things that they say that they support. The left, as I have undeniably proven today, are the real science deniers.